Welcome to Redemption Place's YouTube channel. I pray that this sermon equips you and encourages you to go all in on Jesus. If you think you're too far gone, you're mistaken. If you think you're without hope, you're mistaken. No one is too broken. Redemption is coming. What you have for us, that we don't just let it fall on deaf ears, but that it changes us from the inside out. In Jesus' name, amen. Last week, if you was here, it was what we refer to as Commitment Sunday. We made a commitment. So what our commitments are at Redemption Place, and Rob's going to post the picture on the TV, is we're committed to being all in on Jesus, all in on his word, all in on real community, and all in on our community. That's our 4 fundamental commitments at Redemption Place. So if you're wondering, like, hey, Nick, what does this church represent? These are the 4 things. We're all in on Jesus, all in on his word, all in on real community, and all in on our community. And although I know that we've been meeting for 6 months, like we started meeting in my basement like 6 months ago, for Redemption Place, I consider this year 1. For the last 6 months, we have kind of just, made it, and we've kind of just, built a solid group of believers. And now we're building the foundation on what our church is going to do the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years. I believe that some of you in this room will look back 30 to 40 years from now and be like, wow, I remember when we just started in Nick's basement and there was 10 people. So from that, what's going to happen is, God is hopefully going to grow it, and God's going to call more people, and God is going to be glorified. So what we're going to do this year is the last Sunday of this year will be called Celebration Sunday. Celebration Sunday. And you may be thinking, like, Nick, it's the second week of 2023. Why are we talking about the last week of December? What are we celebrating? Don't we have more important things to focus on first? But here's why I'm talking about it now. The level of our celebration on Celebration Sunday will be determined by the level of our commitment. The level of our celebration will be determined by the level of our commitment. So as maybe you made New Year's resolutions. Whether you hit those or not this year will be determined by the level of your commitment. So I've asked God, God, how can we be a blessing to our city? How can we not just do outreach, but be intentional about the people that we're reaching? So what we're doing, what we've landed on, and I prayed about, and will be accomplished by prayer and commitment, is on Celebration Sunday, the goal is these 4 things. Celebration Sunday, we will pay someone's daycare for a year, buy someone a car, pay someone's OMU bill for a year, and help someone get a home. How are we going to do that? You may be wondering. So if you're anything like, so there's some people that are positive, like, yeah, I heard you. I was like, yeah. And some people are like, well, how are we going to do that? That sounds kind of big, right? Like the whisper just hits your ear like, Nick, that's a lot. But we are going to do that. And that's why I said Celebration Sunday, we will do it, not we might do it. So before you think of all the impossibilities, that's why we started off this year with prayer and fasting, because I believe that our God is the God of possibilities. That's just what I believe about God. But the tendency in human nature is to do what? Play it safe. To always just kind of keep your foot on the base, to always just kind of, not do things that may seem so radical, that are going too far. Shouldn't you save money first? Shouldn't we build a stockpile first? Nick, what if it doesn't happen? What if you look crazy? Nick, just play it safe. Here's what God showed me this week, though, as I was praying through this. If you don't know where you're going, how are you going to get there? And that's how a lot of us live our lives, right? Like, we don't know where we're going, so how are we going to end up there? We just kind of sail wherever the wind blows us. And the other thing that God showed me is this. True faith is never truly safe. True faith is never truly safe. True faith, it always doesn't make sense. True faith, it'll rock you to your core. True faith will have you second guessing, did I really hear that or not? God, are you sure that's you? So some things like God has called me to do. And I'm like, it's safer over here. It's safer doing this. It's more comfortable doing that. But that's where I said, like, true faith is never truly safe. But as human nature, if we all had to admit it, we all like to take the safe road, right? We all like to take the comfortable road and the road that's most easy and the road that's most convenient. And we don't really like to get off the boat and say, God, catch me. We don't really like to put ourselves in positions where God has to respond. We like to kind of be our own gods and say, well, if I can do it and I can manage it and I can take care of it. But I think we as Christians should sometimes step off the boat and expect, hey, God is going to show up. How do you know if God is going to show up if you never get off the boat sometimes? If you always play it safe, if you always straddle the fence, if you always just do what's comfortable. So what I've called this kind of commitment is we're going to go all in. So the beginning of the year, we're going all in to go all out at the end of the year. What's that mean? And Nick, how are we going to accomplish these four things? The first thing we're going to do is pray that God blesses it. Without God blessing it, it's broken. It won't happen. So I can try to come up with the best plan, like, Nick, here's how we can do these things. I can even write a budget and how we can do these things. But if we don't pray first and God isn't leading it, then it's not going to work. So first we're going to pray. Hey, God, as a church, would you provide us the ability to do these four things? God, will you lead the way? Will you supernaturally do what only you can do? And then number two, we're going to commit. We're going to pray, and then we're going to commit. Here's the power of commitment. If 50 of us just gave $20 a month above our tithe and offering in our all-in, all-out campaign, do you know how much that would be at the end of the year? I know y'all ain't good at math, so I'm going to tell you. I'm just kidding. I'm not good at math, so I had to do the math on a calculator. 50 people doing $20 a month at the end of the year would be $12,000. And I'm telling you, I've seen a lot of y'all at Starbucks enough to know you got $20 a month. That would be $12,000 that we could give at the end of the year if 50 people said, I'm going to make the commitment, I'm going to go all in, to go all out. Nick, I'm going to do this with you. So if you give online, there's a place that I put on there, and it says all in to all out. If you give by envelope, you can write on there the first of every month, all in. And all that is, it's not hard. It's eating at home instead of going to lunch one day. It's missing 2 Starbucks white chocolate mochas with extra drizzle. That's all it is. It's small commitments that say, no, I'm all in on this so we can go all out the end of the year. And that's why I said the level of our celebration will be determined by the level of our commitment. That's why it's like it's a dud at the end of the year, like we ain't really celebrating. It's like, well, we wasn't that committed. Like if we buy somebody a thing that's like, Well, we wasn't that committed, right? That's going to be like the level of our celebration will be determined by the level of our commitment. It's a small commitment that starts with what? Stewardship. That's what we're going to be learning about this morning. Stewardship. What are you doing with what God places in your hands? Are you a good steward of what God gives you? Or do you just blow it? Or do you just throw it away? Are you a good steward of your life? Are you a good steward of your time? Are you a good steward of your finances? Are you a good steward of all the things that God gives you? Because if we are, like, God is the owner. God is CEO. Sometimes we like to think we're the CEO. We like to think we're the owner. God is the owner. We're the managers or the stewards of what God gives us. We don't really own anything. You know how I know that? Because at your funeral, you're not taking anything with you. Your house that you live in now will be someone else's house, or it will be torn down one day. You know what you own? You own it for right now. God created this earth. He created you, and he calls us to be good stewards of what he's given us. So I asked you, with what God's given you, are you wasting it and are you throwing it away? Are you using it for kingdom purposes and his glory? Are you using what God's given you just for yourself? Because sometimes when it's about me, I'm the best steward. When it's about me and I want to go on vacation, I'm a make the numbers appear. I don't care if they're there or not. Apply for a credit card. I'm going to make it happen, right? So when it's about me and what I want to do, I can be a good steward really quick. But how about when it's about what God wants to do? I'm not as equally a good steward with what he places in my hands. So if you have your Bibles this morning, we'll be reading about the parable of the talents in Matthew 25, 14 through 28. The parable of the talents. Anytime you see parable, it's a story that he's telling to teach a lesson. So let's read. For it be like a man going on a journey who has called his servants and entrusted him to his property. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, and to another 1, to each according to his own ability. Then he went away after he gave them the talents. He who had received the 5 talents went at once and traded with them, and he made 5 talents more. So also he who had the 2 talents made 2 talents more. But he who had received the 1 talent went and dug it in the ground and hid his master's money. Right now, as I was reading that, if you didn't know the end of the story, it doesn't seem that bad, right? Like he gave 3 people talents. 2 of them doubled up on it. 1 just hid it in the ground but returned it. So today's society would say, hey, that isn't that bad. 2 out of 3, great job. The one with 5 again doubled. The one with 2 doubled. But the one that was given 1 just buried it. He buried it. He hid it in the ground. He didn't do anything with it. You know what that means? He was playing it safe. Well, Master, I don't want to lose it, so I'm just going to bury it so nothing happens to it. I'm just going to hide it so at least it doesn't get stolen. In other words, I'm just going to sit on it. I'm just going to sit on what you've given me. But here's what we all should consider. If the master gave him something that he wanted him to hide, couldn't the master just do that himself? So if the master wanted him to do nothing with what he gave him, the master could have just kept it for himself. He didn't have to give him anything. The master could have just held on to it. It was his property to begin with it. He owned it, but he entrusted these 3 men, and since he entrusted them, there was an expectation with what he had given them. And don't be confused. There is an expectation with what God gives us as well. There's an expectation with what you do with your life. There's an expectation with what God places in your hands. There's an expectation with what you have. And some of you may be saying, but Nick, aren't we saved by grace through faith? And I would say yes and amen. But just because God saves us by grace through faith doesn't mean he saves you just to sit down on your butt. He doesn't just save you to save you. He saves you for a reason. He saves you to use you to grow his kingdom and to glorify him. So what are you doing with what God's given you? You just still sitting? And trust me, I did it for years, right? I went to church and I sit on the back row, never got in the game, but critiqued the church the whole time. Well, they ain't doing this. They ain't doing that right. They didn't sing my jam today. What's the worship team even doing? Why, I can't even clap on beat. I'm critiquing everything everybody else is doing while I'm doing nothing and not doing anything with what God has given me. So again, one he gave 5, one he gave 2, and one he gave 1. Notice, there wasn't equal talents given, but there is equal stewardship expected. So some of us, that's what we think. Well, when I get on a level playing field, I'll do good. If I had what they got, I would be a lot better. Well, if I had the money they have, I would be a giver. If God, you provided this for me, then I would do that. But God isn't negotiating right now. He's saying, look, are you a good steward with what I've given you, whether it's 1 talent, 2 talents, or 5 talents? So what is a talent? Some scholars believe a talent's worth in today's currency would be about $1.4 million. So this wasn't no small thing that these men were entrusted with. This wasn't like a small deal. So when I read it, I'm like, oh, 5 talents. Oh, they got 5 quarters. No, it was a big deal in what they entrusted him with. So verse 19. After a long time, the master of those servants came and settled accounts with them. And he who had received the 5 talents came forward, bringing 5 talents more, saying, Master, you delivered me 5 talents. Here, I made 5 talents more. His master said to him, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. And he also, who had 2 talents, came forward, saying, Master, you delivered me 2 talents. Here, I have made 2 talents more. His master said to him, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. Now it's the third one's turn. Verse 24. He who had also received the 1 talent came forward, saying, Master, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you did not sow, and gathering where you scattered no seed. So I was afraid. And I went and hid the talent in the ground. Here, you just have what is yours. But his master answered him, you wicked and slothful servant. You knew that I reap where I have not sown, and gather where I scattered no seed. Then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers, and in my coming I should have received what was my own with interest. He's saying you could have at least did that at bare minimum. You could have at least put it in the bank and it grown with interest. In church, if you think this is just all about money, you're thinking wrong. This isn't just about money. This is about what do you do with your life? What do you do with everything that God's given you? What do you do with your abilities? What do you do with your time? What do you do with all that God has put in your hands? Because as I said before, God owns everything. You are the owner of nothing. God owns it all. He just calls you to be a manager and steward of what is his. This whole world is God's. This church is God's. It's not Nick Martin's. It's not anybody else's. It's God's. And God calls us to be stewards of it. And one day we will give an account to, was we good stewards or was we not? We will give an account of what God has placed in our hands and what we have done with our life. Truth be told, I don't care how much money is in your bank account, none of it is truly yours. It's all a gift from God. You want to know how I know? I watched Bernie Madoff's story last night. All those people, $64 billion came up missing. It wasn't there. Their life savings was gone. Some of them committed suicide because that's what they put their hope in, their money in their bank account. They put their hope in what they thought was theirs. None of it was truly theirs to begin with. What our generation wants credit for is this, and I'm in the same boat. We want credit for well-meaning. Well, I tried. Well, God, I'm not that bad. God, I didn't do as bad as they did. God, it could be a lot worse. Our generation, that's what we want God to give us credit for is, God, I thought about doing it. We want participation trophies. One time my daughter played a game and they lost by like 20 and they was like, we tied, and I said, no, you didn't. You lost. And they was like, that's mean. I'm like, no, it's real. What we want is that, though. We want, God, well, I meant to. Well, God, well, I thought about it. Well, God, I tried to do it. I tried to serve. Well, God, I had thought about doing it, but I never really got off the couch. But we all know that well thought out is a way different measuring stick than well done, my good and faithful servant. You're not going to get to heaven and give an account and it be, well, good try, my good and faithful servant. Well, good planning, my good and faithful servant. No, it will be, well done, my good and faithful servant, or it won't. There is no in between of that. Like, I tell Bella to clean her room, you know what she said? I tried. I'm like, where? Well, Dad, I picked this up. Is that all you did? Like, that's not well done. So I'm pretty sure the guy with the one thought this. The guy with the one probably thought, my master should be happy that I buried it. He probably thought, well, I could have lost it. I could have stole it. I could have just, spent some of it and gave you half of it back. So he probably thought like, well, I'm doing okay. I'm not that bad. I didn't do as bad as I could have. But what did his master say to him in return? He said, you're a wicked and slothful servant. You're a wicked and slothful servant. You could have at least invested it in the bank at bare minimum. You could have taken what I have given you and used it. But no, you just played it safe and you just sat on it. You didn't do anything with it. You didn't do nothing with it. You just buried what I gave you and put it in the ground. Anybody could have did that. Anybody could take what God gives them, bury it, and never use it for his kingdom. That's what a lot of our generation does. God gives us gifts. We use it for everything else but God himself. God gives us gifts, and we use it for everything other than God himself. We tend to play it safe when it comes to God and his kingdom, but we'll go all out on so much more. You know how I know it? You want a girl, you'll go all out and spend money you don't have. She'll be like, I thought you was a baller. You was buying me everything in the beginning. You was like, no, I was really broke. But you will find a way to make it happen, right? But for some reason, when it comes to church and God's kingdom, we tend to take a step back, start playing it safe, and say, well, maybe one day. And I remember, look, the first time I tithed, my wife I was like, put 20 in there. And she was like, nope, I'm tithing to what we supposed to tithe. And I was like, no, you ain't. And she did it anyway, and I was heated. She dropped it in the offering, and I couldn't catch it. She was like, we're tithing now. And I wish I could say, like, I did that, but she did it. Because I was on my, like, look, I'm going to give 10. I'm going to give 5. I'm going to just pull out what I want. And, you know, like, people think different about that, but she was like, no, we're going to give. We're going to tithe. We're going to trust God. And I was like, whew. I don't even know if that's in the bank. The check might bounce. But guess what? She had faith. And look, and I think God shows up and he shows us he can be trusted, right? We went home and we never check our mail. So we went home and I checked the mail and there was a check in the mailbox for $1,000 on where we paid too much to the doctor when we had Bella. Like, God showed me something. Like, Nick, I got you. I'm like, I paid the doctor. It's not enough, not never too much. Like, I never pay over. They're always calling, hey, you owe this, you owe that. It's never, Nick, you pay more. So when they send me that, and I opened that the same night my wife tithed, I was like, okay, God, you got me. You're faithful. So I'm sure the one with the 1 talent thought, if I would have gotten the 5 talents, I would be faithful. I've been there. God, if you would give me what you gave them, then I would be a better steward. You know how many people say, when I get the new job, when I get the raise, when I get more, I'll do more. I'll be a giver then. I'll serve then. I'll be plugged in then. It's always then. And then you get more and you realize you still need more. You get a raise and you realize you need another raise. And you get the house and you realize you need another house. So more isn't the standard, right? But I'm sure that's what the one thought. Well, God, if you would have gave me the 5 talents, I could have doubled it up too. God, if you would have gave me the 2 talents, I would have did as good too. But no, you just gave me 1. What did you expect me to do with that? Well, we seen what the master expected him to do with that. He didn't expect him to just sit on it. So whether you can do a little or a lot, the expectation is still there. The expectation is still clear, and it's well done, or good and faithful servant, or it's not. So some people, it is like they have more than me, right? They have more resources. God has given them more. And the object is to never be jealous of them, but it's to be faithful whatever God has placed in my hands. So many times we turn an eye and we say, well, they got this and they got that. Well, what about what you got? What are you doing with it? Are you being a good steward? Are you being faithful what God has given you? Are you being faithful over little? The danger zone is we tend to believe when we get the other house. And I'm in that danger zone now, even as the church. I'm like, when we get a building, we'll be able to do so much. And we will, right? But what are we doing with the space we have now? Because if we can't manage what God has given us now, how are we going to ever manage when 100 or 200 come? If we can't serve now when there's 10 kids, how are we going to manage when 50 kids show up? If we can't be faithful what God has placed in front of us today, how are we going to be faithful what God has given us tomorrow? So some of us, here's what we think. Well, God, if you called me to the pulpit, I'll be faithful. Well, how about you be faithful with the broom and cleaning the bathroom? And some of us, we think, well, God, if you gave me $1,000 instead of $10, I would be faithful. But no, you won't. If you can't be faithful with $10, why would you think you would be faithful with 1,000? And you hear people, right? Like, if I hit the lottery, I'm going to give all the sum to the church. I'm like, well, you don't give nothing now. You hit the lottery, you're alive. You're here. You're breathing. You done hit the lottery and you don't even know it. But for some reason, you think when $1 billion flows through your hands, I'm going to buy the church a building. But you struggle to give 40 today. And this ain't about money. This is about stewardship. This is about what are you doing what God places in your hand. Because you never have to give me nothing. You give it to God. This ain't for Nick Martin. It's what are we doing with what God has given us. So some of us may be praying, look, God, give me more. God, give me more. God, give me more. But the question that you should consider is, what are you even doing with what you have right now? So some of you are praying like, well, when I get a spouse, I'll be better. Well, God, give me a better spouse. But what are you doing with the spouse that you have? Are you faithful with them? Are you faithful with your life? Are you faithful with what's in your hands? That's why as a church, we must go all in on stewardship, because as Christians, how we walk matters. Our commitments matter. Our stewardship matters. Maybe instead of some of us, so maybe instead of asking God to bless you with a house and to get out of debt, maybe you should pray, God, bless me with a budget plan. Because you know what I learned? I learned when I budget, money was never the problem. It was always my spending. But I'm praying, right? God, give me a raise. And I looked at the numbers, and I didn't need a raise. I just needed a budget. I just needed to be a good steward of what he had already given me. So I started out with saving $20 a month in my bank account. And that went into savings every month. And I was like, man, this is going to take 86,000 years to build up to anything. And this is going to take a lifetime. I'll never have no savings. But then guess what? Because I was a good steward when it was just 20, when I did get a raise, then I put more in. When I did get a raise, I tithed more. When I did get a raise, I was able to do more. But it started out with, what did I do when I had a little bit? What did I do with whatever that God has placed in my hands? What did I do today? Maybe instead of asking God for a word, how about we be good stewards and we just get in our words? Like some of us, that's where, God, I need a new word. God, give me a word. When you ain't even got in the word today. Like if you spent your whole life reading the Bible, you probably wouldn't need a new word because you ain't learned that word. But you always need more and more. And I'm not saying nothing's wrong with it. I'm just saying, are you being a good steward now? That's why I said, look, if 50 of us just gave 20 a month, that would be 12,000 at the end of the year, and we would have a big celebration. Just 20 a month, if 50 of us gave 20 a month. So instead of as a church, we pray, hey, God, make money rain down from heaven. Pray, God, help me be a good steward of the money you've already given me. That's a better prayer, because even if more money rained down from heaven, if you don't know how to manage a little, you'll lose a lot. You won't know how to manage that. You won't know what to do with it. So some of you are praying for more, and that more will actually destroy you. That more will actually be your biggest burden. And what God likes to do is he likes to strip us down, right, to the foundation to then build us back up, but in his ways and in his spirit and what he wants to do. But we're fighting it, right? Like, no, God, I need that. I need this. No, you don't. You just need God. Are you a good steward or are you not? You know where I get in trouble? This is what I've committed not to do this year. I get in trouble when I look at what other people have. That's when I get in trouble the most. When I look at what they have. And it never ends, right? Well, God, you know what Adam said? God, it was the woman you gave me. If you would have gave me a better woman, I wouldn't have did this. We're always looking for the next thing, right? The reason why we ain't doing what we're supposed to be doing. That's called justification, blame shifting. God, if you would have did this, I would have did that. God, if you would have provided this, I would have done that. God, if you would have answered this prayer, I would have been so much more committed. So that's where I get into trouble, is I look at what other people have. I'll tell God, well, you gave them 5 talents, so I'm at a disadvantage. God, you even gave him 2 talents, so what'd you expect me to do with this measly little 1? Meanwhile, I squander the 1 and still pray for more. I throw it away. And so, you know why he said he gave them each to his own abilities? I wonder why he gave 1 5, 1 2, and the 1 1. He gave it to them each to their own abilities. What are you doing with what God places in your hands? The tendency is for us to look at what they are doing. But you know what you miss when you look at what they are doing? You miss what God is doing. So when you're always constantly, what are they doing over there? What are they planning? What are they giving? What are they doing? I don't know. You're probably missing what God is doing right in front of you. You're probably missing what God is calling you to do because we're so busy looking at, man, God, look at what you gave them. That isn't fair. God, you should have gave me that, and all of a sudden I would be a good steward. You know what the craziest part of it is? If God didn't do anything else, he did enough. If God didn't do one more thing, he's already done enough for me. God has already given me everything when he gave me new life. If he didn't do anything else, if he didn't give me a house, if he didn't give me a car, he gave me everything I needed in him. That's why it's so much, it frustrates me to think like, well, I would have did better if I would have got this. No, God gave you new life. What are you doing with that? God gave you freedom. What are you doing with that? You know what the people in slavery did? They said, God, we was better off in slavery. He's like, you're free now. They're like, no, we're better off over there. At least we had that. So even the tendency is when God set them free is to still look at what's behind. To still look at what's over there. No, look at what God has placed in your hands currently and ask yourself, am I being a good steward or not? That's the question. Am I being faithful or am I not? Here's what frustrates me when I have to look at myself. When I owned my own consignment shop, you know what I did? I showed up early and I worked 20-hour days and I left late. I was committed to it. I put money into it. I cleaned it. We took out loans for it. We sacrificed for it. We promoted it. We tried to reach people for it. We was all in on this consignment shop. We was all in on it. It didn't matter if somebody called me at 8 o'clock at night to rent a U-Haul. I was going to go show up at 8 o'clock at night so I could make money. So why is it that I can use my God-given gifts for that, but when it comes to God and his kingdom, I start sitting on my butt and playing it safe? That's a hard question that I've always had to ask myself. So if it's for me, then I can be all in and I can work as many hours as I need and I can put as much money into it as I need and I'm going to make sure that it goes according to my way. But when it comes to church, all of a sudden I get, well, I don't really feel like it right now. I don't really feel like it today. You know what that consignment shop did for me? Nothing. It didn't give me anything, but I was more committed to that sometimes than I am to the one who gave me everything, including new life, when he gave me himself. So what is your first priority? Is it you or is it God? Is it your little mini kingdom that will one day no longer be there, or is it God's kingdom who will always be there? So some of us, we're building sandcastles that will one day be washed away. I don't care how many houses you get. You won't own them when you die. Your kids are going to sell them. They're going to put your stuff in a yard sale, so you're holding on to it like this is mine. Okay, in 100 years, it won't even be here. So you're going to go all in on that, and I'm not saying, look, that stuff's not important. But if God isn't the most important, then we're sadly mistaken and our priorities are in the wrong place. If I'm going to be a good steward over anything, it's going to be what God has called me to in his kingdom. That's it. That's the standard that I want to live by, because I want to hear those words. Well done, good and faithful servant. I don't want to hear at my funeral, here lies Nick, best consignment shop owner of all time. Some of you, that's how you live your lives. Oh, here lies so-and-so. They was the best this of all time. In 50 years, ain't nobody going to talk about that. Ain't nobody going to remember that. So what are you doing for God and God's kingdom right now? I don't want my legacy to be consignment shop owner. It's so much bigger than that. That's why we're called to stewardship, because it's taking what God has given us and it's using it for his glory and his glory alone. Are you being a good steward? Are you being a good and faithful? Who said no? One day. One day, young princess. Are you being a good and faithful servant? Here's what I know. Other people will be blessed by your stewardship, or they will be burdened by your lack of it. I'm going to repeat that. Other people will be blessed by your stewardship, or they will be burdened by your lack of it. Here's what every church's problem is. 10 people serve while 100 people sit. So what do you think happens to the 10? They get worn out. They get burnt out while 100 people sit and critique. Well, God, what are you calling me to? I know what God's calling you to. What's right in front of you. Some of us, we're waiting till the big thing comes from the sky. God called me to global ministry. Well, what are you doing with your local ministry? Well, God's calling me to reach kids all across Owensboro. Why don't you serve the kids in your church? Well, God's calling me to proclaim the gospel everywhere. Well, how about you read your Bible? It starts with the small things and being faithful in those. And that's why he said, you've been faithful over little, I'll set you over much. Just be faithful with what God's calling you to right now. And don't fall into the trap of, you'll do it later. Guess what? I can always find a reason to serve later. I can always find a reason to commit later, to be a giver later. It's always Monday in my mind. It's always, I'm going to restart on Monday. No, you won't. Commit now. Go all in now. Give now. Share the gospel now. Serve now. Get in your word now. And be a good steward of what God has already given you. Chris, you can come up. Some of you, that's all I'm asking. Be a good steward of what you've been given. Thank God for what he's already gave. The trap is more and more. We live in that kind of society, right? More and more and more and more and more. Here's the truth. More won't ever be enough. You know what I know? That house won't never complete you. That car won't never be a good enough car. No amount of money in your bank account will ever be enough money. You will always want more and more and more and more. When the real question is, are you faithful with what you have now? Are you using it for God's kingdom? And I'm not against having more. But what is the more for? Is it just for you to hoard it and hide it? Or is it to use it for his kingdom? So I pray like, God, give me more resources. But you know what it isn't anymore? It's not so Nick Martin can build this pedestal. It's so I can use it for kingdom resources. That's our desire in more. So when you pray to make more money, the desire should be, God, give me more money so we can give more away. It's not, God, give me more money so I can look at my bank account and see $100,000. No, God, give me more money so we can impact 100,000 people. So what is your priorities? Do they need to shift in you, and they need to go to God and say, God, I'm going to do with whatever you call me to. I'm going to be faithful right now with whatever you place in my hands. That's what he's calling us to, church. He's calling us to all in on stewardship out of an overflow of what he's already done and him going all in on you. That's what amazes me about Jesus, is he went all in on the cross for me, for you. He didn't half-step it to the cross. He went all in and hung on the cross for sinners. So we don't do out of, because we have to, we do out of an overflow of what's been done. God, you have given me everything. You have given me everything. And I complain when you ask me to give this. I complain about, like, that's the most convicting thing sometimes about a tithe is like, God, give 10%. And it's like, I'm going to complain about that when God gives me everything. I'm going to complain about that when I wouldn't have anything if it wasn't for God in the first place. You know where I would be if it wasn't for God? In prison or dead. So when I find myself complaining, sometimes God has to remind me, Nick, you probably could be doing 50 years right now in a penitentiary. Nick, you could probably be dead right now. You probably should be divorced right now. You should probably have nothing right now. But look, I done blessed your life. I done gave you everything, and you're still asking for more and more and more and more and more. Why don't you just worship me? Why don't you just praise me for what you have instead of asking me for more? We all know our kids do that, right? You could give them everything. Like when Bella's Christmas came around, I'm like, what do you need? She's like, she's creating a list of stuff that she don't have, right? Even though she don't really want it, it's just like, oh, I need this, I need that. No, you don't. You don't need anything. You just want more. You just want more that's going to sit in your closet and collect dust. That's what some of our lives look like, collecting dust, hiding our gifts, burying it underground when God calls us to be good stewards of what he's placed in our hands. So I ask you this morning, what's keeping you on the fence? What's holding you back? What's stopping you from going all in on God? It's probably yourself. Depending upon yourself, trusting yourself, going all in on yourself. Right now, what I'm asking all of us is to let that go. Let go of whatever you want to hold on tightly to and place it into his hands. Let go of whatever controls you and give it to God. Let go of whatever's been crippling you and say, God, it's all yours. My life is yours. My everything is yours. I'm going to follow your plan. I'm going to follow your path and stop trying to create my own. That's what we want to manipulate God sometimes. God, if I do this, you do that. No, how about just follow God wherever the chips may fall, wherever he may call you to. That's where we start at. We start out in picking up our cross and following him, whether he gives you more or not, whether he fixes your problems or not. Will you follow him? In his hands, here's what I know. Regardless of what happens, you can't go wrong in his hands. Regardless of what happens, you can trust God. Regardless if I'm on top of the mountain or not, I know God will provide. I know regardless, God will lead. And I know regardless that God will save. There's nothing more that I want to be committed to than being committed to reaching more people for Jesus. That is my life's goal. So whatever God gives me, that's what he's given it to me for. To use it to reach more people. So, to use it so heaven could be more crowded. Some people say that, right? I'm not using it to build Nick Martin's kingdom. Nick Martin is nothing without God, and I know that. So I ask you this last question. Will you go all in on Jesus? That's a tough question. Not 60% in, like I used to do when I feel like it. Not 70% in. Not 80% in. Will you go all in on Jesus? Out of an overflow for that, live a life committed to Jesus. When my marriage was falling apart, and it wasn't being fixed, you know what I had to do? I used to be so mad. God, you're not fixing it. God, I'm doing this. You ain't doing that. You know what the answer was? Nick, stay focused on Jesus, whether he fixes it or not. Stay plugged into Jesus, whether he gives it to you or not. And I had to stay committed, because that's what separates the real from the fake. Are you committed or are you not? Let's worship. Thank you for watching this sermon. I pray that it blessed you and pushed you closer to going all in on Jesus. I pray that you know he invites you in. He invites you to a place with him. I pray that you know that you can find redemption in his name. If you was blessed by this sermon, you can give by mail at P.O. Box 552, Owensboro, Kentucky 42302, or you can give to Redemption Place on the Church Center app. I pray that you have a blessed day.